Hi, I'm Tom Kraeuter.
And I'm Nick Coetzee.
I'm Grant Norsworthy. This is Worship Think Tank.
Well, looks like we have a question from South Africa.
That's your homeland,
That's
right?
my homeland.
Let's check it out.
All right.
Greetings from Cape Town, South Africa. My name is Ricardo Burnett. I'm a worship leader and recording artist. I travel around leading worship at different churches and events. I'd really just love to know, with regards to tracks and stems, what is the pros and cons? Thank you. Blessings.
Tracks and stems. Like, is you talking about train tracks and like stems of plants or something?
Plants.
I think so.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, so I don't see the relevance to your question. Next question.
I think I know what he's talking about.
Oh, okay.
And
Explain it to us, Nick.
Okay, so in the last 10 years, there's been a move toward utilizing what is sometimes called tracks and sometimes called stems. And what a stem is a part in a song. So you can have a multi-track that you can bring in on some software that allows you to have the song that we're about to do in church, have the drum part, have the bass part, have the electric guitar part, have the auxiliary keyboard part, have the main keyboard part. So if your band is missing one of those members and you are playing to a click track, which a drummer then would at least hook in, so that means that click track would be keeping everyone in time with the multi-track that's being fed from the back, but we're only hearing whatever's missing in the band. It allows you to have a fuller sound on that Sunday morning
So we're
service.
talking about having some extra sonic elements
Correct.
that we are not playing or singing on the platform, but they are being generated from some other automated source.
And what are the pros and cons of using that technology?
Or the full tracks as opposed to just the stems.
Which is unusual, but most times a full track is used when there's no musicians and there's only singers in a church, and it's to say a small country church.
It's like,
a lot of times
like
they'll just
karaoke
use,
sort of thing. Then.
That's more of a karaoke thing.
Yeah.
And so
But it happens.
It happens all the time, and it doesn't create an environment of raising up musicians, because it's like, well, the musicians don't come because they're using tracks. So it's a catch-22.
And I think a lot of this has happened because the amount of production that can be done in a recording studio to produce these songs has grown exponentially. And so we're trying to have a live performance of songs that matches, at least as closely as we can, to this wonderfully produced studio version. And so that tendency can be, wow, we want to sound as good as that recording. The only way we can do it with our volunteer team or even with our paid team is to, now some people would say, so we're going to cheat a little. I don't call it that, but to add these automated extra sonic elements. And
I would say that in the midst of that at least part of it, it's almost like a competitive thing, or it can be, let me say that.
It can be, yeah.
In order to keep up with the church down the street, we have to do this, because otherwise they've got so much more than we've got. And that aspect, I'm not saying the whole thing, I'm saying that aspect can be unhealthy.
Right.
I think there are pros and there are cons to utilization of this technology. And even in the last 5 years, there's now software that you can buy that allows you to move away from the original arrangement, which is really good. So you can, with a foot pedal, let's say I want to do the chorus 3 or 4 more times. I don't need to be controlled by the track, because that's the biggest con on the pros and cons.
You're usually being stuck
is like,
to
well, I don't like
structure.
using it because I'm stuck with that arrangement. You now can actually bring in the ability to repeat the chorus a few times if you feel like the Spirit is leading you to stay on the chorus and not go back to another verse. And I think that it is important for a band to learn how to play without any tracks and sound good. So sometimes it makes the musicians a little lazy to just unmute the keyboard player if he didn't show up. Or let's say he was late, we'll say, we'll just use the track.
Or I've also heard, he's not a very good player, so let's let him be up there pretending to play. We'll mute him and we'll bring up the stem for the keyboard.
I was hoping you wouldn't mention that. But
it happens. It happens.
That does actually happen. And so there's definitely a lot of pros and there's a lot of cons with this. So it's a really good question, Ricardo. And so Tom, did you have any more you wanted to add to that?
The only thing I would say is that in regard to the tracks themselves, I would say that I've seen churches that kind of something you alluded to earlier, that it ends up pushing musicians out or doesn't allow them to come in, simply because we've created this false idea of this big sound that we can do. Well, gosh, the church has a guitarist that can be there every week that's kind of mediocre, and a piano player that can come every other week. We can't compare those two things. This is going to be so much better than using the track.
Well, it's going to be better sonically.
Right. So we do that, and that causes these people to become discouraged, and nobody else wants to become a part of what we're doing. But if you ask the church, ultimately, almost always, their goal is to have live musicians, but using the track almost defeats that. It pushes against it in some ways. So I would be really cautious about using that concept, because you don't want to squelch those people who perhaps could step into that role at some point.
Yeah, and I would say even within the I can put it this way, the Christian music industry. Like, I've played in some bands that have been recording, touring bands, and you put all this effort into your studio version of a song, and then you don't want to have people listen to you live and feel like, the album sounded better. And then you realize if you're on a bill with 2 or 3 other bands and they're all using tracks and they sound massive, then you don't want to be that like thin sounding band. So in that sort of situation, I'm actually more prone to go, all right, we're competent players, we play well, we can do this without it, but because we want to give people a great experience of our music that we've recorded, and we want to match up with the sonic quality of the other bands on the bill, then use them. But I'm actually pretty much against them in a congregational church setting. And I'll tell you why. We need to remember why we're having music in this. And I'm talking about the, usually Sunday morning church gathering. We are here to get the congregation singing passionate praises and prayers to God. I believe that we can present a sound that's much more inviting when it's really us who are going, don't be yourself. Be as good as you can, but don't pretend to be Hillsong. Don't pretend to be this big touring band. You don't have to match what you heard on Christian Contemporary Radio. Be who you are and invite people to fill the gap. Because if you produce this big ocean of sound, which I hear from bands who are using stems and tracks, the congregation go, whoa, I'm going to listen to this. Leave a massive gap for the congregation to sing into. And that's what's most engaging. We have to remember, we are here to invite people to connect with God and connect with each other by singing these songs. We are not there to entertain them like a touring band. So, I'm not going to say you're wrong if you use them in that setting, but I'm going to say, are you trying to create a pretend concert experience on a Sunday morning? If that's your motivation, it's not good enough for me.
I like that, Grant. And I really like the aspect of that having this big sound does make the congregation feel like they should be enjoying the listening of this, rather than if there was a little bit of gaps in the music, and there's a sense of, hey, join us as we all worship together, because really God is the audience and the people are the players, and the worship team really are the prompters, rather than the worship team are the players, the people are the audience, and God is trying to break into our time of entertainment. And so I think some songs could use a track because maybe there's an electronic loop that drives the song. I like using that. But I don't like using a whole bunch of the 3 or 4 guitar parts when there's only one guitar player, because people can notice that they're hearing a guitar, but they're not seeing a guitar player.
Well, and they
so
might not know it
that well.
consciously, but I think they read it subconsciously.
Yeah.
We've got to use our weaknesses as strengths. God's given us the people we have, with the abilities we have. Let's do whatever we can, accessing the creativity that God gives us, and get these people singing. Now, tracks help with that, go for it. But I just don't know that they do very often.